Can you hear me again? You can wave, I can see you. Great, thank you. I'll be talking also about feedback, but feedback of a slightly different type based on our experience in Framingham. Next slide, please. Again, welcome back to snowy Framingham, Massachusetts. Slide number 3. I'll talk about feedback to participants regarding notifying them about the results of genetic results. I'll share with you information from an NHLBI working group on participant notification of genetic results, steps that we took in our informed consent process to allow us to inform participants, and the implementation of policies that we developed specifically for purposes of participant notification. Slide number 4. In Framingham, it's been our practice for decades to report to participants clinically relevant, or we can call it clinically actionable, results from their routine visits, things like blood pressure levels, blood glucose levels, etc. We've been doing that since the study began in 1948. When we began the recruitment of the third generation cohort about 12 years ago, it was our policy that individual results of genetic analyses would not be returned to study participants. In fact, our consent form itself specifically stated you will not be informed of the results of the specific of the research performed on your genetic blood sample. Participants were kept informed in general about the results of that type of genetic by use of our periodic newsletter, in which we might have covered the result of publications based on that collective genetic research. However, slide 5, in 2006, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute working group on genetic results reporting came out with a publication that discussed general criteria for results notification. And what I could tell you is that in this whole deliberative process, there was an enormous split right down the middle of the research community whether or not to permit participant notification of the results from genetic research. Slide number 6. The NHLBI working group stated that there are conditions in which genetic results should be offered back to research participants. The decision to report genetic results should not depend solely upon the discretion of the investigator, but should include perspectives, and that standard criteria or guidelines should be developed that include careful consideration of the risks and benefits to participants from notification of genetic test results. Slide number 7. The committee the working group went on to identify 4 criteria that were required in order for results reporting to go back to study participants. And those criteria are as follows. The first was the test had to be a valid test. The second is that the associated risk for the disease has to be substantial. The third is that the disease has important health implications, not just identifying someone of hair color or eye color. And the last criterion is that there has to be a proven treatment or preventive intervention for that condition. In other words, that the result is clinically meaningful, actionable, and the action for that condition would have important implications for the well-being of that individual. And so our Ethics Advisory Board got together with our executive committee, reviewed the NHLBI working group to make recommendations to us on whether we should implement a policy of participant notification in Framingham. Next slide, number 8. In 2006, we published a newsletter to our participants indicating that mechanisms are in the works to notify study participants in the future of significant genetic findings that carry high risk for disease and for which a beneficial treatment clearly exists. I was actually integrally involved in this newsletter and the development of this policy for notification. Little did I recognize, however, in 2006, how many hurdles and barriers we would have to jump through in order for us to actually implement a policy of participant notification. Slide number 9, please. In anticipation of genome-wide genotyping that we were doing as part of our genome-wide association studies, our executive committee, working with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, our Ethics Advisory Board, and our IRB, introduced a genetic results consent clause in our most recent offspring and third generation exams. And you may be able to read the small print here. And it says, if a genetic condition is identified that may have potentially important health and treatment implications for me, I agree to allow the Framingham Heart Study to notify me, and with my permission to notify my physician. So we included this clause to allow us to provide this kind of genetic feedback to our study participants based on our interpretation of the 2006 NHLBI workshop that made recommendations for the criteria under which participant notification could occur. Slide number 10. And we even went so far as to publish the results of this participant survey and their general beliefs and desires regarding their wishes to be notified about genetic research. Let's go to slide number 11. Here are the results of participants' wishes regarding whether or not to be notified about an actionable genetic finding. And it turned out that 99.5% of our study participants who attended the exam that immediately followed the implementation of that consent clause wished to be notified about such an actionable condition, and obviously with their consent to notify their physician, which would require a second level of consent as well. 12. So in response to the very high rate of participants' desire to be notified in the cases of actionable genetic results, our executive committee empaneled an expert committee of geneticists and ethicists and genetic counselors to advise us on the creation of a notification plan, and specifically to identify among genetic variants that had been genotyped in our study participants a subset of those that we felt fulfilled criteria for actionability and therefore notifiability. Among the 550,000 genetic variants that we genotyped in 9,000 study participants, there were 2 examples that our expert committee felt met the criteria for participant notification. And those were a variant associated with hemochromatosis and a variant that's associated with familial Mediterranean fever. Next slide, please. With that in mind, we went back and developed a series of materials to bring to our IRB to allow us to notify study participants. And those included a participant notification letter that basically said, we have identified a genetic variant that likely will increase your probability of developing iron overload, and in severe forms, excess iron overload could result in the development of a condition called hemochromatosis. We went on to explain that condition is readily treated and that hemochromatosis was both reversible and also preventable through simple procedures such as taking blood, reducing the amount of iron. We also developed a notificational physician. We developed a physician notification letter itself that provided information on iron overload and hemochromatosis. We drafted a newsletter article on our plans to notify participants about, for those who carried a gene variant for hemochromatosis. We also, for each participant who was involved by virtue of carrying this variant, information on iron overload and hemochromatosis, and also information on the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, an act passed by Congress to prevent employers from discriminating against participants who carry a variant, or health insurance to discriminate against people getting health insurance in the event that they carry such a variant. So we prepared all of these materials, went back to our IRB for permission to notify them, and in fact our IRB turned down our request. It was rejected after the initial application. And then over a period of 2 years, we went back to them repeatedly with examples from other universities and other studies that had implemented procedures for participant notification. A subsequent NHLBI working group meeting that grappled further with the issue of participant notification that came out, was published in 2011, and supported our viewpoint that the results of array-based genotyping were sufficiently credible to notify participants, and these two conditions did merit notification. And for that reason, beginning about a year and a half ago, we began the process of notifying 31 individuals who carried a genetic variant for hemochromatosis of their carrier status in line with this whole notification procedure, and also 5 participants who carried genotypes for familial Mediterranean fever. It turns the feedback from our participants to us on the process of notification was overwhelmingly favorable, and the whole experience has been a great learning one for us in Framingham. I'll stop at this point, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.